Ready. Welcome. It is June 11th. We are coming to you virtually. This is the Olentangy School Board of Education regular meeting. Mrs. Hatfield, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. King?
Present.
Mr. O'Brien?
Present.
Mrs. Patrick?
Present.
Mrs. Wagner-Fiesel?
Here.
And Dr. Weiss?
Present.
Thank you.
Please join me in the Pledge to Allegiance. Next slide, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I will now entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll move.
Thank you, Mr. King. A second, plees.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Fiesel. Please call the roll.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Wagner-Fiesel?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Weiss?
Yes.
And Mrs. Patrick?
Yes.
Thank you.
Before moving on to our presentation this evening, Mr. Rafe has a special announcement to share. Mr. Rafe.
I do?
Yeah, you do.
I'm completely...
This is where you're setting up the next report.
We have a presentation. Could you please explain why we're having this?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I know you guys told me that. You did prompt me that. Yes, I'm very pleased to announce that our next presentation by Mr. Jeff Gordon and Mr. Bruce Runyon from Fanning Howey will be announcing the location for our 16th elementary school here in Olentangy, and it'll be off of Peach Blow Road and a new development going in called Berlin Meadows. We've been working for the past almost 3 years on a development agreement with Berlin Township trustees, the Delaware County and Metro Development for some donated land and some road and sewer improvements. So that has all finally come together, and we will be getting an update here from Mr. Gordon and Mr. Runyon on that project. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder about what I was announcing.
Well, it's been a long time in the works. I know you've worked very, very diligently. All parties have, and so we thank you for that effort. And I would like to welcome
Mr. O'Brien has his hand up.
Oh, he does? Wait. Oh, I see it. Mr. O'Brien, please chime in.
So will Berlin Meadows be the name of the elementary, or is that still TBD?
Oh my God, with all due respect, Mr. O'Brien, that is like
premature.
Such a Julie Wagner-Fiesel question, and you beat her to it. I'm just so disappointed that you got your hand up before her on that question, because it's probably already on her Facebook. I don't know. We will. Mrs. Davis, would you like to chime in?
Sure. So normally when we name a school, we allow public participation to share in a survey format what ideas our community members have for the name of the school. So we will start that process here very shortly, now that we are a go to move forward with this site and the next elementary.
But naming rights were not part of the development agreement, so.
Oh, no, for the right price.
Exactly. Always, yeah. Yes, Mr. O'Brien. As you and I know, always for the right price.
Good.
Berlin Meadows sounds like a good name, though. I like it.
Yeah, that has been, when we do get the donated sites and developments, that has typically been our process. Oak Creek. I think Johnny Cake Corners kind of broke that mold. But Oak Creek is one of the ones that's in a development. Glen Oak obviously is in a development. Hallam Creek. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, well, with that, let's welcome our Director of Business Management and Facilities, Mr. Jeff Gordon, and joining us tonight from Banning Howie is Bruce Runyon, our architect.
Good evening. I get to defer the fun stuff to Bruce tonight. He will cover the elementary building, and I will quickly run through just where we're at with some of the bond projects before we jump into the building. As you are aware, we originally had planned to start the security vestibules and playgrounds this summer. So we had gone through the process of working with the buildings and in case of the playgrounds was Pupil Services Department to establish what those playgrounds would look like as far as the structure and then the soft surface, and the main piece of that being updating equipment and then bringing the playgrounds up to today's handicap accessible standards. They were handicap accessible when they were put in, but we need to bring them up, or as we update them, we will need to bring them up to handicap accessible standards. And the security vestibules, we had previously designed the middle and high school security vestibules and had planned to go out to bid with those early this spring in order to get those in this summer. So 5 playgrounds and security vestibules had been scheduled for this summer. With the delay and the pushback and everything that happened with the levy and of course the current stay-at-home orders and those things, we did not feel we'd be able to get contractors in place in time to finish these projects before our anticipated regular start of school this fall. So those projects are now pushed to next year. So our goal is to complete all of the security vestibules next year. While the middle and high schools have been designed, the elementary design will be a replication of the existing elementary, or I'm sorry, we have the 11 elementaries to do, so that'll be the same design. So that should be a fairly, and I'm sure Mr. Running's virtually kicking me for saying it, should be a virtual repeat of the same design over and over, 11 times just flipped. So the design on that, we're anticipating to have the design for both the playgrounds and the security vestibules completed in time to go out to bid very early in the spring. All of the projects we're talking about today that'll go out for bid next year will go early winter, so we can get contractors in place. For example, the playgrounds, ordering those structures, we'll have roughly 15 different playground structures of similar design that we'll need to have ordered. So to get all of those in a short period of time would be difficult. So our plan is to go to bid as early as possible, to have those lined up so that when they start installing those over the summer, we're not waiting on material and equipment. So the security vestibules and playgrounds will be started next summer. The elementary 2 and middle school 6 design, our plan is to hire the architect at our next board meeting, make that recommendation, and start bidding for elementary 2 and middle school 6 next summer. So there'll be more of that to come very soon. And next slide, please, Dustin. And that is the media center update and collaboration space creation. We have kept these together. When we designed the elementary media center update, or the change to the media center at the elementary 1, we really tried to do that in a manner of and look at how we could repeat that and make those changes when again, assuming that as the levy passed and we went forward, knowing we were going to be doing another 14 elementaries or 15 elementary media centers, elementary 2, and then the existing. So we worked with a group of media center specialists that Mr. Fetty brought together and really looked at the design and where we were headed with the elementary media center. So our plan is to carry the same components of that design from the elementary 1 that's currently under construction, starting construction, to all the rest of the buildings. And we're not planning to do a huge renovation of construction or tearing down walls. It's really taking the space and moving some of the same components into it, which are a lot of the collaboration, furniture, technology, that type of thing. As well as the collaboration space, we'll create groups of media center specialists and others from the middle school and high schools to work with us on where we create those high school spaces at and those middle school media center spaces, along with the new collaboration spaces. In some case, they may be some of the same, and others we may have the media center renovation and space in other parts of the building. That's yet to be determined as we meet with the groups and find out what's best for for each building, since there's so many different needs. For example, Olentangy High School had what was always called Locker Island. They removed those lockers last summer and created a collaboration space up there. So at Olentangy High School, they've already taken that step where now we can expand on what they've done on the second floor with the collaboration space, as well as continue the other work they've done in updating the media centers. So that is more to come as well for next summer. We've got a lot on the schedule for getting done next summer. Dustin, please, next slide. Broadcast journalism studios. We have our teacher at Orange High School is very proactive and very upfront with the journalism technology and what they're doing at Orange, as we all know. So we worked with him to design, along with Mr. Sexton from technology, the broadcast journalism rooms room at Orange. And we're going to carry those same components that we put into the room at Orange to the other 3 buildings, of course, modified for the different spaces that each building may put it in. They all would not necessarily at Berlin or Liberty may not go in the same room that we did at Orange, but they'll have the same components in it. So they'll be very similar in design and what's available with those rooms. So those also are on the schedule for next summer. And the Hyatt's Middle School bus lane and stadium parking expansion is another project that we will need sooner than later, and we'll start design and plan to go out to bid early next spring and install in the summer of 2021. And the last item on the list that we're covering tonight is the bus parking expansion at the West Transportation Center. Based on growth and our timelines, that's a project we can defer to 2022, and we will plan that one for start designing that at the end of 2021 for bid and installation in the summer of 2022. So with that, if there's not any questions on the bottom projects, I will defer to Mr. Runyon to talk about the elementary.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Dustin, if you go, thank you. I'd like to thank the board again for the opportunity to continue to work with the district on this project for the benefit of all our students, and I appreciate again the opportunity. Next slide, if you would, Justin. Thank you. Jeff warned me several times to be brief, so I'm going to try my best to be the briefest I've ever been in front of the Board of Education. So first, planning meeting discussions that we had on this, very condensed. We had 6 different planning meetings with Dr. Fetty and the elementary school principals before we ever came together on what the plan expansion would be for the elementary school. This has been based off of the replicated design from the late 90s and early 2000s that we had built 11 of. They've been very successful buildings, but they needed updated. Lots of code updates, lots of building updates, lots of technology, mechanical equipment updates. That all went through Dr. Fetty, the elementary school building principals, development committee, and of course the operation and maintenance staff. The number one building design impact that Dr. Fetty and the elementary school principals needed for the educational delivery method in the elementary schools. The number one goal was to increase the academic classroom and small group areas and recapture the building support areas. As we've grown, we've continued to attack and just use any space possible for educational uses. And their goal was any square footage we can, recapture full academic classrooms and create more small group areas that can be used for any functions with all the variety of programs that we have in the elementary schools, and that those continue to grow. Secondary to those, but still very important, was reorganize the office area so we can have an integrated security vestibule, like we're building on all the new buildings, like will be built at the new building, the new elementary school here. And then dedicated SLC classrooms with internal restrooms and internal tutor rooms to those buildings with the growth of that program. Design those rooms to work the way they need them. Also, there were a lot of energy efficiency updates. The last time this building had been built was 2010. Many energy code updates, building code updates, all that contribute to energy efficiency. So there's going to be additional wall and roof insulation that made our exterior walls wider. The building envelope now has an air barrier that all lends to, again, more energy efficiency. And then building-wide mechanical and electrical upgrades and energy improvements across the board. That technology of those components has changed over and over since this building was originally designed. So it really was a new design with those components, and all of that was with a point towards increased energy efficiency and then operating efficiency for the district long term with the building. And then Dustin, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done with the energy. We have a couple of questions before you move on.
You bet.
First one is Mr. King.
Actually, I can wait till he's done. I put my hand up earlier, then I tried to erase it because I thought I'll wait till Bruce is done. But
Apologize.
since you asked, I just would like a comparison of the number of students from the previous prototype to this new one. Number of students.
Okay. The original building design was designed for 650 students. This building with these additional classrooms, it'll be easier to show you on the plan, Mr. King, but you can put additional students in this building. That wasn't the main intention, I believe, of Dr. Fetty and the building principals, but obviously that increased square footage will allow, and more classrooms will allow for that if that's what the district needs those buildings to go to.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fiesel, did you want to wait, or do you have a question before I move on?
I'll wait till the end.
Okay, sorry, Bruce, please continue.
Thank you. Dustin, if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So as a reminder, the existing building design that we've done 11 of is on your left. That building's a little bit bigger than 72,800 square feet with basically the classrooms around the perimeter, and then the activity areas, a media center, gymnasium, cafeteria, music, art in the center of the building. The new design is on your right, about 10,000 square feet bigger. This one's a little more than 82,000 square feet. And just for simplicity, the blue rooms that you see across the bottom third of that square footage, that is the new square footage in the building. The building got lengthened. We used to call this a square box. Now it's more of a rectangle. And that blue square footage across there is the new 10,000 square feet, including the corridors. But for clarity's sake, we didn't shade that in blue. And we're going to talk about this in a blow up here on the next slide. So Dustin, if you'd go on to the next slide there. Thank you. So this is the new elementary school design. Again, very comparative to the original design, just improved on many fronts. First and foremost would be that additional square footage. And where was it put? Again, in that blue across there. What that really came down to is it's 6 full academic classrooms and then a total of 8 additional small group rooms in that square footage. And what that really, again, allows the district to do is recapture the full function of the support spaces that were being used because of our growth and increased enrollment to recapture those for their intended uses, like an art room or a music room or the gymnasium. I'm sure most of the board is aware that your staff, your principals, Dr. Fetty's staff, you've grabbed just about every space you could in some of these buildings to use them for academic purposes. This will allow that to resort back to being for their intended purposes. So the highlights are you have 6 early learning or kindergarten classrooms, 27 dedicated elementary school classrooms, 2 dedicated SLC classrooms, and 16 small group / conference rooms in this building. And it's really going to allow a lot more flexibility and capability with how our educators use the building. These rooms have been properly sized because not all classes need a full classroom. That's why there's such a number of the small group rooms, and they'll lend themselves to just about anything that I believe the academic, that the curriculum is going to throw at it. And then to highlight is some of the wording around those plans. For example, in the upper left-hand corner of the plan, what used to be 2 5th grade classrooms have been put into 2 dedicated SLC classrooms that have an internal restroom and an internal tutor room to them. So they're designed for what your program is using them for. Your principals went back and forth and on where these rooms should be, and those rooms ended up by the office area because administratively they're called to help and to assist with those rooms a lot during a school day, and they wanted them close to the administrative office. It also got them close to an exterior door for direct access or direct egress out of those rooms if need be. The new academic core space there in the blue, again, the 6 small group classrooms and 6 additional elementary classrooms. The exterior walls over on the right-hand side, the exterior walls around the building are 2 inches thicker. That doesn't sound like much, but that allowed us to increase the insulation to meet the new energy codes and include the air barrier. And then up at the top is the reorganized office and security vestibule. And this is much like you have seen at Berkshire Middle School, Heights Middle School, or at Berlin High School. You come in, you're captured in that existing security vestibule, and then you're buzzed in directly to the office. So the office staff can size you up before you're able to enter the office, but you're in from the outdoors. There are obviously other improvements, too many to mention, too many to show on a plan like this, that go with the electrical and the mechanical updates to the building. Again, lots of technology changes as well that goes with that. This will be the district's first true all new LED lighting throughout. You've done so much conversion in the district the last several years. This will be the brand new LED fixtures throughout the building. The mechanical system is going to be far more efficient because of things that the mechanical staff needed and wanted done. And it's really going to, I think, pay dividends long-term for the district. Any questions on this slide before I continue?
Mr. O'Brien has a question about the capacity again. I know you
Sure.
touched on it.
Sure.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yeah, so if I heard you right, there's 5 to 6 new classrooms at 25 per classrooms. So is the capacity of this elementary 125 to 150 students larger than our existing capacity?
If that's what the district would like it to be, the answer is yes, it is. Certainly from a building code standpoint, it can support those additional numbers that you just listed out there, Mr. O'Brien. It's really up to the district on how you want to model the building, how you want to put those students into it. But it has the capacity to do that, certainly.
Okay.
Okay.
Because we've had an ongoing debate over design capacity versus real capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to get a sense of what is the design capacity versus the real capacity of an 82,000 square foot building versus a 72,000 square foot building. Because we've got 72,000 square foot buildings with 725 kids in them.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this was. Some of the principals that Dr. Fetty brought into our process here were the principals that had lived in those buildings with those capacity of kids in there. They're the ones that really fought for, we need to recapture those full functions of those spaces and increase the small group spaces to it. The design or code capacity is one thing. I would say the educational capacity is up to you folks. I won't speak for the district on that. That's the real number that I believe you're looking for in regards to that. But code-wise, it will fit those capacities. And I see Mr. Rafe popped up there.
He did, and so does Mr. King have a question too. So go ahead, Mr. Rafe.
Well, could I get one last question in for those?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
Sure.
No, by all means.
Should we think differently about capacity given social distancing and other things going on in temporary versus permanent changes due to the COVID-19 pandemic? How are we thinking about that in terms of design?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. That's a great question because it can affect this, and it'll go back to what the district may choose to do. Certainly, when you try to do social distancing in any school building, it's going to lower the capacity. I know you're all waiting, the whole state is waiting on what may be guidelines coming from Ohio Department of Education. as well as other organizations in the state that can control this. And that may impact how the district moves forward with this. We've not set a social distancing capacity on this building. To be honest, to be able to go into construction as we're ready to go into construction now, that was an afterthought, if you would, because of where we were with design and bidding on this project to be able to get it there. We can easily go back and do that. I've not done this. Mr. Gordon and I have talked briefly on that subject, but the conversation's been awfully fluid on what you're going to be facing there. I would say that the capacity, though, of that, if you tried to do strict social distancing in a full school day and things like that, is going to be considerably lower than what we're used to putting in our schools, obviously. Then there'd be the operational discussion you would have to decide and have on how you would do things like physical education. Do you use the media center for media center? Are you using cafeteria for lunches, or are the kids going to eat in classrooms? How is that going to be? And I'm not going to put myself into the educational discussion, because I think there's many more items that I do not, that aren't my area of expertise, and that you have the capable hands of with the administration to talk about, and I'm certainly here to support them if they need.
Thank you.
Mr. Rafe?
Yeah, so I was going to call on Dr. Fetty to add anything he can to the whole because he's the one who facilitated all the conversations with the principals.
Good evening.
Good
So I would say that the Mr. O'Brien's point about us going back and forth with design capacity, educational capacity, is obviously on point. We've been all over the place with that. The educational capacity of this building is up to 750 students. We can stretch beyond that to, like Mr. Runyon said, there are more rooms, you can fill them up with more kids. But after 750, we begin to compromise the intended use of the space. I would also say that our intent, at full functioning capacity, I wouldn't say that under 750 we're below capacity, because it always depends on where those students are and how they're distributed. So we have 6 early learning classrooms. In our district, we try to keep our kindergartens at 22 on average, and our preschools need to be around 16, I think is the number currently. So if they're being used for early learning purposes, that drives that number down. So when you utilize those spaces as they're intended, that's where we get to the 750 number total.
That is very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
I think that helps. With Mr. Kevin, does that help you with your capacity question?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Kane, did you have a question as well?
Yes, Bruce, I just wanted to confirm, is the requirement for sheltering still a moratorium?
Yes, Dave. Mr. King is referring to the storm shelters that a lot of you have heard of. This had been back and forth. You actually had put the budget in to do a storm shelter if need be. The state had put moratoriums on that. The district decided not to do that to this building. So that money wasn't used. It's still in the district. And that storm shelter right now, in fact, Dave, we just found out earlier this week, there is now going through the State House a moratorium to extend that extend the moratorium 2 more years. With Olentangy passing the bond issue at the end of April of this year, you were under a moratorium then that would have expired in November of this year. But the trigger point is not that the building's designed or constructed. The trigger point was if you had approved your funding. Not if you had sold your bonds, but if you had approved your funding. And with the district approving its funding the end of April of this year, you're not only under the moratorium for this elementary school, but you will be under the moratorium for elementary school number 2 and middle school number 6 if you choose to be. So that's where that's at.
I think Mr. O'Brien had one more question for you before
Yes,
we
ma'am.
move on.
No, I actually put my hand down.
Oh, okay. These little hands, like I was so excited about them, but then I don't know how they go away. So
Yep.
does anybody have any questions before we move on? I
Yeah.
think you're good, Mr. Runyon.
Thank
Proceed.
you. Then Dustin, if you go one more slide, please. Oh, thank you. There you go. So again, overall, this is the labels that we added. There are just the overall labels or the overall areas of what you see. I should have turned off all the rest of the individual stuff, but you'll see the early learning classrooms in the upper right-hand corner. Those have been the pre-K kindergarten classrooms. The general classrooms towards the bottom of the page, as well as up the left-hand side of the page. And then small group areas in the core of the academic wings. And then in the core of the building, the media center, the art room, the student dining and gymnasium, and then the music. And you'll see the kitchen and mechanical areas off to the right-hand side there. And then Dustin, one more slide, and I think you've got me then. And so with Mr. Rafe's announcement here of the site, in Berlin Meadows subdivision, which is along Peach Blow Road. This is just east of the railroad tracks and east of Pyatt Road. The building site will sit about 2,000 lineal feet off of Peach Blow Road, and it will be accessible by a new North Road extension that is being built by Delaware County in conjunction with the developers surrounding this area that'll benefit from that road. So while you're not right on Peach Blow Road, you're going to be on the new North Road extension. That road is being designed by Delaware County and their consultants, and that road will start construction through Delaware County this fall. And Delaware County keeps assuring Mr. Gordon and I that'll be ready for next summer for the start of school for this project. So that's good news. So that's where you're seeing yourself situated here. It's a rather odd-shaped site. Mr. Gordon's done a lot of work, and Mr. Rafe have done a lot of work with the developers to achieve this with us. It's a little shy of 14 acres. It's a smaller site for the elementary school, but it fits the needs of what we need. Oftentimes that retention pond you see to the right is on your property. This benefits our school district. We needed the dirt to help bring the building up on the site, and we needed a place for our stormwater to go. So we're building that pond. The county is going to enter into that a little bit with some of the storm drainage from North Road. The nice thing is the school district won't own that property of that retention pond, won't have to maintain it. And I believe the developers have plans to make that a little more landscaped than what the school district would usually do, and then they will maintain it certainly. So that's a benefit to the district. Overall, you see the plan in white on that building. So the front door sets due north facing Peach Blow Road. The main parking lot to just the north of it there is 157 spaces. The bus parking lot off to the right is a little bit different layout than what we've had. Mr. Gordon had contributed quite a bit to this, and this is a very safe way to load and unload your students. It's a diagonal parking scheme, and the buses can peel off individually. And again, it's a very safe way to unload and load your students. That has a normal daily parking capacity of 33 for staff, but in the evening for events, you add another 35 spaces because you won't have the buses there. So overall, the building has a capacity of 225 parking spaces. Is that enough? It's never enough at an elementary school in Olentangy, but it is one of the highest counts that we've ever gotten in one of the elementary schools at Olentangy as well. The playground is to the south of the building there. The asphalt area is that gray or the pavement area, and the salmon color is the redesigned big toy area with soft surfacing. You don't have a playground in the district, I believe, like this, with the exception of the small new playgrounds at the additions last year at Wyandotte, Alum Creek, and help me out, Jeff, Scioto Ridge. Not Scioto,
Arrowhead.
Arrowhead. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so that this will be the model, if you will, and we designed it as such for the district. This is the model for the new playgrounds Jeff mentioned earlier. They'll all fit in that same footprint. And then the service area is off to the right or the west of the building, as it's been with all these buildings. And then the softball field is basically for student use and community use as the district would see fit. Overall, it's a very compact plan. And you will be in there first. There's not really a soul out there on Peach Blow Road around you. One resident to the northeast of you and a business to the northwest of you right now. And we'll be ready to start very, very soon. And that's what I've got for you. I'll take any questions that you might have.
Mr. O'Brien has his hand up again.
Yeah, so I guess a quick question on location. While this is closer to Arrowhead, where we probably have some capacity, it's probably, my sense is we picked this site to relieve some of the pressure on Cheshire. Is that fair?
I think Mr. Rafe has probably got the best answer for that because he's been all over this one.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the site is west of the tracks. I'm not sure if Bruce said east, mistakenly said east.
I'm
but
sorry, I did say east, Mark, thank you.
Oh, trust me, Jack, Randy, Todd, Krista, they were been texting me all over. He said west, he said east. That's all right. But it is west of the tracks, south of Peach Blow. You know, and as we talked, as Emily and I did, you know, all the coffee chats for the levy, and we talked about, you know, trying to get some developer donated land, and we have multiple sites in the district, Curve Sweeney, Berkshire Middle School, Bean Aller, Bunny Station. The problem with all those sites, there's no population density around them. So this site fits Berkshire, Heritage, Arrowhead, and Cheshire are all pushing over 800, projecting to be over 800 students in the next 2 years. So, and with all the development, and you know, Kevin, you used to live by obviously Belmont. They just cut that whole new development. Everything that's getting, you know, everything that is going up right now is this site is in the sweet spot of where that is. And you know, Mr. Gordon is the one who brought this to us 3 years ago when we knew this was coming down the road, that we were going to need another elementary here soon. And you know, Jeff went out and identified a site with Metro, and you know, because these development they take a couple 3 years to get through the planning processes. So even though we still have the opportunity for a site in Evans Farm, you know, but this one was just ahead of in the development process. So there's still, we'll have a lot of flexibility for the second elementary that we'll have to work on in the next year, identifying where that's going to go, and obviously the middle school. And we can use the Curve Sweeney site, but if we can get with a developer and get another site donated, we're going to work really hard the next 2 years to try to have that done so we can put them in areas that will have the most minimal impact for redistricting.
Thank you.
I see Mrs. Fiesel has her hand up.
Yes, I'll go through can I go through my list of questions?
You can.
Okay, so I envision this as kind of being like Arrowhead, where there wasn't anything around it, and then there will be in the future. Is that correct? Will it be walkable so that people who eventually build there can walk to school?
Yes, ma'am. At least if that's what the district wants. I know that the North Road design being done by the county will have a walk path, bike path associated with that along the school side of the road. Then we've connected, right now it'll be paths to nowhere, but we have paths on the school site that will head out to where the future bike paths and walk paths in the development are currently designed with you as those homes and those amenities get built out over the coming years. And if you look in the lower left-hand corner there, the site plan, you'll see an asphalt path going out to nowhere right now. You'll see the sidewalk and a path in the lower right-hand corner doing the same. And then those would connect up to things that are off of the school property and into the neighborhoods. The same thing with the walk up in the upper left-hand corner that will go around the entry drive to tie into the public sidewalks. And there will be housing to the upper right-hand, upper left-hand corner, lower left-hand corner, and to the south and to the bottom of that plan, all around that as that development gets built out.
Great. Do we have an approximate cost of this donation? Like, what is the value?
I do not. I can tell you it's a little less than 14 acres, but I do not have what that value might be.
So
Yeah,
what's Jeff, like 50,000 or I don't know.
Yeah, it's somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000 donation, depending on, this did not have a lot of frontage, which would drive that cost down, since it's, once North Road's in, we will have it, but to have bought this land where we did without a lot of frontage may impact the price. I know the land south of Berlin High School that was for sale, they were asking $50,000 an acre. Has not sold yet, and the land in that general area has gone between, which this property and several other properties have been sold over like 5 to 10 years ago, and it went for 35 to 40. So between 600,000 and 700,000 would be the approximate estimate based on what we've seen selling in that area.
Okay, then because we've added size to this building and some classrooms, did we add any to the cafeteria? Because that's always a question. Yeah, if we put more kids into a school, we don't have any more cafeteria space. So did we make this cafeteria a little bigger?
We did not make the cafeteria bigger at this building, because talking with the principals, the capacity concerns weren't at the elementary. The middle school is where the capacity on the cafeteria became a concern, and something we've discussed. If we delayed with middle schools, that we would be seating possibly on the stage for the cafeterias. At the elementary level, they felt like the capacity at the elementary cafeterias really weren't the concern. The biggest concern was taking the other spaces, as Mr. Fetty and Mr. Runyon talked about earlier, using classroom spaces for some of the smaller group requirements that we had for the SLCs and some of those other classrooms. So to be able to have those dedicated spaces there and more of the one-on-one tutor spaces with the 8 additional areas that Mr. Runyon highlighted, that was their priority, was to kind of get more of those spaces so they could have their classroom spaces back, they could have their custodial offices back, they could have their staff dining areas back.
And then Mr. O'Brien had talked about social distancing. I think, oh my God, I want to remind people, this doesn't open this year, it opens next year. And if we're talking about social distancing next year, we've got a lot more problems to worry about at that time. But here's the big question, elephant in the room, will it get done?
Jeff, you want to take it, or you want me
Yes. You've heard me say many times how fortunate we are to have Mr. Runyon and then Mr. O'Sullivan working with us, and there's not a better example of that than where we're at with this building. And the prototype we've done 11 times. While this building is bigger, it's a very cost-effective model, a very efficient model to build. Mr. O'Sullivan did a report to the facilities committee about that, I think almost a year ago, in anticipation of what we were going to do with this design. And so the benefits of that are right now, where it's helping us the most with our delay, is that we know what it takes to build this building. While it's 10,000 square feet bigger, it's built the same way, along the same track, allowing that time. And then we did hire Robertson Construction as our construction manager at risk, who built this model of elementary 3 or 4 times. I can't remember exactly, 4 times. So they have a lot of experience with it. So one thing that's been really great is as the levy was delayed, we sat down, had conversations with the whole team, Robertson, Mr. Runyon, Mr. O'Sullivan, and talked about, okay, when can we get started on this? If the levy originally, they said June 2nd. We started looking at different dates. If we can do that June 2nd, start right away, then where are we at? Then when it got moved back, the vote was moved back and certified earlier, that gave us a couple weeks back. So we've been able to sit down and really adjust the schedule based on that information, and as a whole, we feel like we can get that done. And that's with 3 entities working with the district that have done this building several times and feel good about the the contractors. And at the next board meeting, we'll talk about the GMP2 and the final cost, and we can talk a little more about that. But yes, right now we feel like the schedule is on. We're going to finish probably later part of June. If, just based on our timeline, things could speed up, they could delay, but later part of June, beginning of July, but still with enough time to get school open. Now, it all goes well, but we do have a little bit of a leeway there. But right now, we still feel like we're on target to get that done.
And that's all I have.
Great. Ms. Patrick, with your permission, again, I'd just like to thank the board again for this. I'd also like to thank Mr. Rafe, Mr. Gordon, and Dr. Fetty have been huge contributors into this process and the design of it, as well as our development committee and the facilities committee in particular. We can't do this the way we do it here in Olentangy without those folks, and it makes for a very pleasurable design process. It's great having an educated client, is what I tell people about what our success at Olentangy is. I'd also like to put out there for the board that we have had just great cooperation and assistance on this building from Delaware County Engineers Office, from the Sanitary Engineers Office, from Delco Water and Suburban Gas. They have been really great partners with us in helping us get to this point, and I want to put that out there. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. Before you go, I just want to make sure, Kevin, your hand's not up because I see a hand up. Nope. Okay. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm really excited to see this. I love the collaboration that went on behind it. I know that we have pushed our staff to utilize every square inch of a building before we had to come before them and ask to build more. They've done that, and I'm really excited to see this. Yay for that parking, the bus parking, because I have been in front of those elementary schools and the buses are all lined up one at a time and they kind of have to wait for one to pull out, and that's great. I didn't even think about that. So thanks for catching that, Mr. Gordon, and
thank you.
remedying it.
Great. Thanks, folks.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, we'll move on to the board president's report. I feel like a lot has happened since our last meeting. I would like to open with the topic of graduation. The level of detail and consideration while observing the current social gathering restrictions, I thought it was a home run. I was able to see parts of all 4 ceremonies from the comfort of my home. I will share that I did tear up at each one of them, and I haven't even seen the speeches yet, so I am really looking forward to that. Graduation always pulls at my heartstrings because I can see the pride that our staff has in its graduates, and that's the reason they do what they do every day. So we have gotten a lot of very positive feedback, and I felt like I was right there, not just watching it on the screen, but I did take screenshots and text them to some of my friends with graduating seniors. It looked like a very personal experience. I am so glad that the class of 2020 had the opportunity to come back together for some closure and to celebrate. It was truly a pleasure to witness. Job very well done. And I think that's a great transition into my next topic, because there are several heavy issues that are facing our district. Back up one slide first, please, Dustin. Not just our district, but our state and our country. And I want to first address the return to school. Openings in Ohio are being announced daily, and guidelines are lagging. Literally, things are changing by the day, and I feel like change is the theme of 2020, and it's not over yet. So the return to school plans have been underway. I saw Mr. Meyer at district office today, and the binder for the plan so far is this big. So they have started. Mr. Rafe is going to cover what the community engagement communication plan will look like in his superintendent's report. I want to acknowledge the growing concern that the community has for health, safety, and equitable learning for our students and staff. The return to school planning will be met with the same careful care and consideration And our mission remains maximize learning for every student. The community engagement has begun, and I can tell you that there will be communication. Be patient. The guidelines are coming to us in pieces, and we will continue to change, adjust, and communicate. There's no guidebook for this, and we're just going to keep moving forward. Next slide, please, Dustin. Moving on to the subject of racial injustice. I am very proud of the work that was demonstrated by former and current OLSD students. Both the Powell and Lewis Center protests were organized by our current and former students. I am very proud that our community came together, rallied, and showed their support. The photos in front of you is from the Lewis Center protest, and it was so long. It was very nice to see the volume of people that came out. Mr. Rafe created a position for supervisor of diversity and inclusion back in 2016. The district has liaisons in every building that hosts multiple events throughout the year. This was all part of his platform to address non-academic barriers to learning. And we are not perfect, but Olentangy is dedicated to achieving inclusive excellence. And I just want to restate a portion of the letter that went out last week to the families in Olentangy. That letter was sent by Mr. Rafe, myself, and our supervisor of equity and inclusion, Dr. Jackie Merkel. We all have a role in this. Remember, your voice has power. Use it to speak up and advocate for change within your spheres of influence. Never forget the importance of listening. Seek to understand others' viewpoint and consider new perspectives throughout conversation. Educate yourself about racism and conditions of inequity. Learning is a process, and we can invest the time to get better together. And finally, get involved in your school, your district, your community. Translate your voice and passion to a tangible action. All members of our community, we see you, we hear you, we value you. And this is a great conversation. This is a great time to have really deep conversations with your family. At this point, I'd like to open up the discussion to Dr. Wise. Her and I were able to attend these events together. Dr. Wise?
Yes. On June 2nd, Mindy and I, along with our families, we attended the peaceful protest in downtown Powell. It was a great experience for us to see the community show their support in social injustice. And then this past Saturday, Mindy, her daughter, and my children participated in the Lewis Center protest, which was started at Orange Township Hall, proceeded down South Old State Street to East Powell Road. And again, there was remarkable support from our community speaking out against racism and social injustice. I love seeing the community come together to bring attention to social injustice and racism. I would love to see the same support for the resources with our districts, such as the diversity committee and participation in the One community. We're very fortunate to have our supervisor of equity and inclusion, Dr. Merkel, and also our diversity coordinator, Ms. Heather Cole, along with the diversity liaisons that are located at every school. They're all working towards improving the educational environment for our children and our teachers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very proud at the direction that our district is going, and I don't know if everybody knows, but not all districts have a program or have been able to meet the needs of a program like this. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done and the dedication to continuing that work. Mrs. Fiesel, I think you have some information or an update for us around some of the pending legislation on school funding.
I do, and again, it's breaking news. Sometimes I think we all need to go back and watch Schoolhouse Rock, the I'm Just a Bill video, because some of this can get really confusing. For those of you who don't know, the House and Senate are now on summer recess. So this past week, they've been very busy trying to get their work done because the House won't be back until mid-September. The Senate has some, if needed, dates scheduled, 2 in July and 2 in August, but it's highly irregular for them to come back during the summer. So there was a lot of legislation that was COVID related that needed to get done. And one of them got done for Olentangy thanks to the hard work of Senator Brenner and Representative Carfagna. But as we've been discussing our last 2 school board meetings, Governor DeWine cut state funding for schools to help close the state's budget due to the pandemic. And those cuts totaled $2.9 million for our school district alone. That was an executive action. It did not go through the legislative process. So once those cuts were made, Senator Brenner and Representative Carfagna reached out to the district, you know, to see what help they could give to us, knowing that we were in the top bracket of receiving cuts. Well, yesterday, Senator Andy Brenner in the Senate Education Committee proposed an amendment to an existing House bill. It had already passed the House and it was now in the Senate Education Committee. And he proposed an amendment that would gain additional funding for those school districts that were highly impacted by state budget cuts. And the additional funding that he was proposing in his amendment wouldn't come from the state, but it would come from the state's share of the federal CARES Act. So I want to make that known. This is not coming from budget money in the state, it's coming from the federal government. So into House Bill 100 and it's House Bill 164, Senator Brenner's amendment went in, plus some other education-related issues that I think are pretty good. And it was passed by the Senate Education Committee and then later in the afternoon by the full Senate. So then today, the House had to concur with those changes to the bill, and I'm happy to report that it passed the House 87-3. So that means there's some Democrat support in there as well. And so pending the governor's signature, it looks like Olentangy will receive $2 million to help make up for the 2.9 that was cut by the governor. So I want to stress that this is an additional funding coming from the federal level, not from the state's budget. And as a reminder, we have discussed during this whole 5-year forecast discussion, you know, we had already discussed that that Mr. Rafe told us that the school district was already decided to make $1.3 million in cuts to future hiring and professional development to help absorb those cuts. So we were already making plans to help absorb those cuts, and now it looks like we'll actually be getting some of that money back. Also in the forecast, there was, when we approved the forecast, we decreased state funding for this fiscal year, next fiscal year that starts July 1st, and for fiscal year 2020, because there's still a lot that is unknown about state funding. State revenues are coming in under what was projected. And so we still may see some additional cuts to our state funding. But I will tell you, this additional $2 million that's coming from the CARES Act is greatly appreciated, and we certainly appreciate the work that was done by our elected officials. In the House, both Carfagna and Jordan voted to concur with the bill today. So that's great. You know, Senator Brenner got the amendment in for us and he voted for this, so that's great. So we really appreciate the time that was put into giving Olentangy some money back. It's greatly appreciated.
It is. Thank you. Let's fingers crossed that it gets signed by the governor and we can move forward.
We don't have any it's looking like he's going to sign it because it's not coming out of his budget.
Right.
But you know, we don't know how or when we will get that money back. It will be coming.
Great. Well, thank you for the update and being on the pulse of what's going on legislatively. Well, that concludes my president's report. Mr. Rafe, please join us for your superintendent's report.
Well, thank you. Next slide, please, Dustin. And I will start. So yeah, as you mentioned, Mrs. Patrick, we are very proud of the work of the team that put together the graduation walks. You see there the high level of participation that we had, and even more important was the live stream views. People from all over the country got to participate and share this day with our families. Next slide, please. And as the conclusion to the celebration of the class of 2020, Saturday, June 19th at 9 a.m., we will be airing the complete video for the graduation, the virtual graduation. I'm really proud of the work that went in. We've taped all the speeches, did recordings of all the names of the graduates, so it'll look like a very traditional graduation ceremony. So tune in January 13th at 9 a.m. We'll be airing all 4 graduations. Next slide, please.
Will it be available after the fact as well?
Yes.
Great.
We'll archive it. You can watch it over and over and over again. Focus on my speech, please. So as we mentioned, this is our back to school communication plan. We have obviously highlighted areas for each week. We did send out a survey. The community has jumped right in. In the first 5 hours, we had about 6,500 responses. We're surveying staffs, we're surveying the parents, we're using all that information. You note there on the week of June 15th, we're doing a student survey. We're going to review all that, put it together with the state mandates, and try to, and obviously then put together a plan. Dr. Fetty and Elaine Eddy have been leading the back to school committee that is part of our negotiated agreement with regards to virtual learning. So we hope to be in a position to share preliminary plans the week of July 6th. So, you know, it's just, I think it's premature to put out too much too soon. We want to be really thoughtful about how we're putting this back together. It is our hope that we are back in school in the most normal fashion possible. But, you know, we have to be ready for every contingency. So that's how we're trying to build this plane as we're flying it. Next slide, please. So 3 action items that are of note. We have put out for bid again our district insurance for property, fleet, and liability insurance. So you see there in the amount of $409,206. We are going with Lauterbach, Alber and Inc., who represent Liberty Mutual, and we've had Liberty Mutual for quite a while. There is a task order agreement with CT Consultants for the design and construction of our offsite utilities for new elementary 1, which I'm going to start calling elementary 16 since we're past the levy. And then we have an amended license agreement with Kennedy Asset Management. And as I mentioned to all of you in my update, this is reflecting our participation in some cost for the offsite sewer for that site that we agreed to in order to get the deal done. So next slide, please. And then our 3 important dates coming up. We have, as I already mentioned, we had on June 10th, last night, senior awards and our scholarship night, which was very well received. We have June 13th, our virtual graduation, and our next board meeting is June 25th, which we will be doing virtually because the stay-at-home back to whatever the orders are called these days still have school buildings closed until June 30th. So we're going to stay with virtual, at least for now. With that, I'll take any questions.
I do not see any hands up.
Oh, hey, I think I have my hand up.
It's been up the whole time, Kevin. Just go ahead.
I try to keep it up. So my other comments, I would be remiss to say that, you know, as board members, we get a lot of feedback, a lot of things. And I can't tell you how much positive feedback we have received on graduation and the drive-ups and from parents and students. And I can't tell you how well that was received, how well it was done, and how thoughtful it was. And so I just want to commend the administration for getting that done. So it's great job.
Thank you. Thank you. As I put in my memo to you, It started with a simple idea that, sometimes I have an idea. I stole the idea from Delaware City, brought it back to the leadership team, and through Krista and Randy and Todd and Jack and Emily and then Jeff Gordon and his team. And just, if you could have been there the mornings as we were, everybody was all hands on deck, putting just the final touches on all of the little details. The only snafu of the 4 days was Krista wearing the wrong shoes and getting 7 blisters. So you ladies in the crowd will understand how that goes. So we, of course, had to hear about that for the next two events, but she's doing a good job of not jumping in or shooting her hand up, isn't she?
She is. I have to say the weather did. I knew it threw Berlin's timing up a little bit. It ended up being a beautiful night, and you had some pretty nice weather that weekend.
Oh, that made it perfect, and that I'm sure tempered people's emotions about it. But just actually, Mrs. Davis did decide late after watching Dublin's, the way they did theirs, to have our people drive with their cars under the tents, and she, in the last minute, changed the type of tents we have, and that really made it perfect, that the parents were literally in arm's reach away from their kids as they were on stage, getting their picture, getting their diploma cover from the principal and whatnot. So it was a lot of work went into it, and it was very much appreciated by the community. So proud that happened. Thank you for saying that, Kevin.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands up. Well, thank you again. I'm very, very proud of the work that was done and the effort showed, that's for sure. Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Rafe. Let's move on to the treasurer's report. Mrs. Hatfield, welcome.
Thank you. We'll get started by going through very quickly some highlights from the bond sale. We were, as Mr. Gordon kind of touched on, we are good to go with the construction and ready to start that. One of the steps to do that is to go through the pricing process so that the bonds are available and considered backing the construction so that bids can be awarded and we can move forward with that. As you may have remembered, with Moody's and S&P Global, we maintained our high ratings. With Moody's, we have a AA1. With S&P Global, we kept our AAA rating. And so it's considered very steady debt that we issue, very high credit rating. And so the sale went very well. We sold $52 million of tax-exempt bonds. They are 30-year and limited tax general obligation bonds for school construction. Our overall interest rate, the average for the increments in which we sold it, was about 2.3% overall. So that's a very low interest rate for that kind of debt. We were excited to see that number come back, and roughly $345,000 for the issuance, which is paid to the underwriter, bond counsel, our municipal advisory team, the rating agencies, and then the paying agent that actually holds the bonds and helps us make payments to the actual bondholders directly. We pay the paying agent and they then pay the investors. So we're happy to have that underway. We expect to have the proceeds from the sale and close on that June 25th, which then we will have the cash be ready to go. The cash that we have will be invested with our financial investment partner, Red Tree Investment Group. We've been very successful with the interest rates and cash flow analysis and strategies that we used when we had the funds with them for the high school. We want to continue that partnership. So we will be investing those funds as they are idle and set up a cash flow that will allow us to draw down on those proceeds to pay the bills as they start coming in from the construction group. We also have, we're starting our fiscal year-end process, so we're getting ready to close the books. Our fiscal year-end is, our community and other listeners may remember, is June 30th. We talked about that quite a bit when we went through the 5-year forecast. So we finished the forecast. We have that approved. It's been submitted to the Ohio Department of Education per their regulations. And now we're going through the process of closing off check orders, closing out purchase orders, working with our buildings to talk about any last minute items that may have come up, working with Jeff's department, of course, to make sure we've got everything underway for construction. And then at the final meeting in June, we will have permanent appropriations for next fiscal year and final adjustments that may be made for this year to get everything ready to go for the audit. We are also preparing salary notices, working through fixed assets and getting those booked. And then again, working on our cash flow plans for the rest of the year. The one action item that we do have on the board agenda this evening is for the approval of contract with Meta Solutions for the implementation of e-finance fiscal software. We've been spending the last year really kind of combing through software options. As of December 2022, Meta, our IT support group, will be no longer supporting our fiscal software. It is very old and antiquated. It is DOS-based, actually, meaning you have the old blue screens where you have to tab through interfaces. You might have 7 pages for one employee benefits record. It's really tedious. It functions well, but it's very old and tedious and slow in processing. And so with that, Meta is offering 2 solutions that you can choose. You can choose eFinance or you can choose the state software redesign. And essentially the biggest difference is the state software redesign is taking the current platform and just making a more Word, I would say like Microsoft Word type of interface for it, where you have drop down menus and you can select more options, etc. And the main screen looks more like a spreadsheet type of situation than an old DOS-based tab, where you have specific data points that you can enter information into. It doesn't really give us any other features that could help us with employee self-serve for direct deposit notices, reprinting W-2 polls, looking at what they have available for their tax deductions. All of that information is locked down and is information that our department has to pull and provide to each person should they ask for it. With the new software, one of the key components that we're excited about is that once we get it implemented and are live as of July 1st of 21, we will have a component that is an app that staff can download, and we'll give them that self-serve option. They will be able to see their employee record and see their direct deposit, pull their own information for themselves when they need it, as well as check on any kind of their deductions and information that's included in a direct deposit. So that's going to be really helpful for them to have that at their fingertips and kind of keep it ready to go for them in a secure way. The other thing that we really like about eFinance is that it has the capability to integrate with human resources software. So right now our software is very siloed. We have our staff doing spreadsheets and I would say manual data entry to track some items that are going into the human resources software, being pulled out, downloaded to spreadsheets, submitted to payroll. Payroll has to key it in, and then we double check ourselves to make sure that we keep getting the same information between both systems. So it's a very antiquated, slow, tedious process. And as good as we are human and errors can occur. So with eFinance, what will happen is we will be able to establish workflows that are electronic, meaning either the applicant can enter their data, that data can go into the applications used by the Human Resources Department. Another workflow is established, which pulls it over into payroll. Payroll can review it and apply their additional information that they need. It keeps the employee record electronic from start to finish, and it also makes it flow through the district. One of the things that we are challenged with, as we are with our student population, is a growing workforce. And we want to make sure that we can grow with that workforce and continue to offer them exceptional customer service with a system that is going to keep up with the times and the volume that we have as we continue to increase in size. So the Meta contract is that they will house and support the software. They will back up the software. They will be able to have firewalls around the software, as I do with our student information system. Those of you that are not familiar with student information system, that is PowerSchool. So PowerSchool is what our student information is kept in, that has their grade, their coursework, their level of fees are integrated into that, parent information, all of that information about the student is housed there. eFinance helps connect with that as well. It's a component of, or another branch of, the same company in terms of software. And the idea that with keeping this all in that same system is there's no longer, again, we don't have this download upload situation going on. We have the capability of reading the student information with the parent information, which then gets connected with the staffing information. And now we're going to tie in fiscal information. And so as we have to report to the state of Ohio about student X being taught by student or teacher Y, what does teacher Y make and what is their education level? That'll be tied through human resources. What is their payroll and what level are they on? What step are they on? Now it's all tied together from that into our accounting codes, and it all fits together and can go to the state of Ohio as a workflow too. So that's another main component why we wanted to go with a larger software that would help us kind of connect those pieces, so we can be more effective and influent with reporting to the state of Ohio and with our EMIS backside of the house. And with that, I'll take questions. I believe Mr. O'Brien has his hand up. Is that new, or do you have a comment for me?
Mr. O'Brien. Unmute.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Kevin, I didn't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay.
So I hear and I appreciate all the efficiencies being articulated. Have we quantified how many FTE we can reduce as a result of these efficiencies?
In terms of FTE we can reduce, we are hoping that this will help take, right now we have in our future planning another addition to my department to help with some of this data entry and keying, and we're hoping to avoid that hire. Right now we are just keeping up, but we're just keeping up and not providing any value added, or they're doing a great job. I don't mean to sound like I'm cutting down my staff. They do a phenomenal job, but they need some relief and they need better tools to be able to keep that efficiency up and support our staff as they've come to be expected. So our hope is that we will be able to keep our staff sizes to the minimum levels that they are as we continue to grow and get bigger with more staff.
But I guess my question is just not within finance, but within, if the payroll, HR and all that is integrated now, are there opportunities to reduce, reduce headcount between finance and HR?
You know, there may be at some point. Right now, what we know as integrating a new software to this magnitude, we will probably have a year and a half, maybe 2 years, where we'll actually slow down a little bit because we'll have to relearn and gain our efficiencies in our processing. And hopefully through that, we'll be able to say, okay, now how can we, if we gain the efficiencies we think, how can we redirect staff to maybe a different purpose? As we grow, they can fill in some spaces that we may have had to add people to in other departments or other areas. Because of that growth, I don't feel like we'll have a staff displacement. It would be more of a repurposing as we continue to get bigger.
So I guess, given that, and I guess the size of the contract is $315,000 contract, what other platforms do we consider, and how does this compare to economically the other platforms we considered?
So the other platforms we considered, well, let me take a step back for just a moment. The $237,000 is for the first year, which includes implementation and training. So all of the work that we're going to do and this coming fiscal year to prepare and convert all the data and all the information over to the new system. That's what that amount is for. And then each year going forward, the annual payment would be $65,000. So that that $300,000 has an implementation, and then there's this much smaller annual payment that will continue each year over year to maintain the software and keep it going. The current state software that we are on, the DOS-based system, and then the new interface, my understanding is that they are moving toward a payment per pupil amount, similarly to what we pay for Power School information systems and others, meaning it would be about $3.50 per student, I think was the last estimate that we got on the redesign, and that Meta was going towards that type of situation for any software that we had supported through them, is that there would be a per student amount assigned or invoiced for that. It would no longer be quote unquote a free state software. The state has just carved back on their ability to redesign and support a statewide system for the schools, as you can tell from I wish I should have brought screenshots of what we're using, because it's truly a database logic, like knowing name commands to type them in, right? So if you think about something like, as we looked at other packages that are off the shelf, meaning Oracle, QuickBooks, things like that are on the market and more mainstream, some of the problems with those types of software is they don't report to the state. They don't have the background component of tracking teacher code, teacher licensure, how many years of experience they have, what licensure they have, do they have multiple licensures, and all of that information has to be reported to the state of Ohio and affects our funding. So we have, in our opinion, it's more secure for the district to move with a software that Meta will support. And that way we know that we've got 24-hour support. If staff moves or changes, there's still an expert available to help train staff and get them on board and keep the software moving in a positive direction. They have, again, the additional safety and security in the firewalls, and they comply with all of our state reporting that some of the maybe cheaper, less expensive off-the-shelf products can handle our day-to-day fiscal, but they can't handle all of the reporting side that we have to maintain to get our funding. So, yes, e-finance is the more expensive of the two options through Meta, but I also think that it's time for us to get to a more effective software, a software that the district can grow with, and continue to use a platform that can integrate into other, that can integrate with softwares versus having to constantly download data entry, create databases, create new ways to keep track of payroll and staff and students. We will finally have a true database warehouse where we can pick and choose the information we want to get out of it, not pick and choose where to find the information, if that makes sense.
Okay, so with that said, it sounds like there was a process to evaluate two solutions from Meta. What was the price differential between the two choices?
So if we're looking at our two choices, what is it? I'm sorry.
I understand,
At 6,
I understand the other stuff. I'm just trying to understand, did we bid this out or did we just pick the platform we wanted?
it wasn't a bidding process. Meta offers the solutions, and here are the two price points for the solutions, and here's what the two solutions can do. So Meta, as a group, worked with other software providers to see who could meet the requirements for state funding and what they would charge. Power School was the cheapest vendor for that and was the most effective at meeting the EMIS requirements. At some point, gosh, probably 2 to 3 years ago, they were talking to multiple other vendors. But those software vendors couldn't provide anything close to this price point, and they didn't speak to Ohio's reporting needs. There are other softwares used in other states, but those other states, again, don't have the backhouse reporting that we do. They're not set up the same way that Ohio is to report. So what Meta has brought forward is a bidding process, a not refining process, a weeding out process, if you will, of who can give us the best tool with the most sophistication and reporting satisfaction, and then giving us the state redesign, which is basically what we have now with a more user-friendly interface on top, and or a new system that functions well. My concern with the redesign, I've been to several seminars. I've talked to a lot of districts that have used it. I've had some districts who are small, maybe 2,500 student count, say, the redesign is sufficient enough. It's good enough for what we have, for what we need. I've heard bigger schools say they've tried it out and went back to Meta and said, take us back to state software, we'll try something else, because it just doesn't, the redesign doesn't capture those efficiencies that we're looking for when you're a larger district. And so, we went back and forth with that. We also visited several districts that had e-finance. Myself and our assistant treasurer, Melissa, went to a couple of different districts, and then our staff also went to a couple of different districts. We went to Hilliard and Licking Heights to understand how payroll versus budgetary worked within the software pieces, and how did it process? Can we get better? Can we get faster? What have you seen? What have you gained out of it? And in both instances, without going together, we let them go on their own, so they weren't influenced by what I was looking for. They were influenced by what their positions need. And they all came back and said e-finance is a much better opportunity for us in terms of gaining efficiencies. Once we learn the software, we'll be able to take off and be more effective in our positions. So knowing that we had those two interactions with the software interfaces, it helped us drive closer to e-finance.
Kevin, do you mind if I make a comment about this and ask Mrs. Hatfield something, or did you have additional?
I'm still trying to understand the answer to my question. My question was, there were two choices to be made. What was the cost of choice A versus cost of choice B? I understand.
The cost of choice E, we just mentioned that the cost of what we have before you, the annual cost is $65,000 divided by how many students. It's a cost per student. The redesign would be about, our original estimate was $350 per student at 22,000 students. I didn't do the math. We kept having a conversation about the other pieces.
I had a question about that. I thought
so $350 per student times 21,000 students.
22.
$7.4 million? That doesn't make
sense. No, $65,000 divided by the number of students that we have is roughly $3. The redesign, the last information we saw was about $350 a student.
Okay, so
I'm not including the implementation fee
of the choice you're pursuing versus the total cost of the other option. That's all I'm trying to get to.
I had a question about that too. I just want to make sure I'm remembering something correctly, but I believe it was our last board meeting, Mrs. Hatfield, did you talk about there was some cost savings with ACH payments that we could recoup?
The ACH payments that we were talking about before was using another tool to create credit card-like payments with vendors. That will help us bring in about $95,000 to maybe $100,000 in revenue each year. So that tool will, it won't pay the first year where we have the complete conversion, but it should, at that year after that, it should more than cover the annual cost of the software.
Okay.
So annually the cost of the software, right? $65,000 is the annual cost of the software divided by our number of students, because they're charging it on the size of the school, is a roughly $3 a student. The last estimate I saw on the redesign was about $3.50 a student. So they're not far apart in cost. eFinance has a larger conversion cost because we have to pick up the software, take everything out of the state software that we currently have and put it into a new software. Part of that component change is looking at the way that the account codes are structured. And the account codes, right now we have 28 digits and there's a smaller number of digits in eFinance. So we'll have to do some conversion with that. That would be more intensive than just slapping on a new interface to that.
So is there a business case that was developed that would articulate that the efficiencies to be achieved offset the transition costs?
Do I have a document in writing or a memo to summarize that? No, I did not put that in writing. Is that what is happening? Yes, I believe so.
I'd like to see that. Can you articulate that in writing?
Sure.
Thank you. And then while we're on this contract, the liability cap, I think, is a real concern for me, because the way the contract is written, no matter what Meta does, if they're negligent, if they aren't doing appropriate security practices, and there's a data breach, the only thing we can recover for them are fees paid. And I think that is a weak liability cap, and I think that needs to be renegotiated.
May I ask, I apologize, my frustration is in the timing of the question.
Okay, I guess I'm confused as to,
I sent this question in advance.
no,
At
Kevin,
1 o'clock
I don't
today.
I don't understand the liability cap. Can you help me with that, Kevin?
So as the contract is currently written, they have a liability cap that no matter what happens, the most we can go after Meta for is our fees that we've paid Meta. So for example, because they have the HR personnel system on this platform, if there were to be a breach where staff, in particular 1,300 people's PII were breached, and we would be in a situation to provide them with some sort of credit research, credit report, whatever, like you've seen in other breaches,
Right.
the most we could ever recoup from Meta, even if they were negligent, would be the fees that we have paid versus the potential cost of litigation, the potential cost of remediation, etc.
I understand that concern. I think that, of course, cybersecurity is one of our utmost concerns with anything that we do in the financial department and with our personnel information. We have gone through the process of requiring their security measures, how they have their security set up. We had conversations with our technology director to ensure that I understood the coding and what they were referencing, and the technology is backed by security that is similar to a banking institution, meaning that it's that high with encryption and it follows all of those protocols in security, and it goes through Meta's firewalls and security enhancements in that regard as well. So those measures that area, and I felt confident in that, making sure that we had vetted that process to know that we were bringing in something that was not going to be good for our staff. Having said that, going back to Meta and renegotiating that piece of the contract will possibly delay implementation. I don't know at this point how much, but it could possibly delay the implementation. And so if you want me to go back and redo that work, that's a possibility. I just want to make that clear as well.
Julie also has her hand up. Kevin, do you mind if we touch
Sure,
base?
absolutely.
Go ahead.
DACC went this route, but of course we have fewer students. I just want to throw that out, and they're going through the conversion process now. But to Kevin's point on if there's a data breach, would our other liability insurance pick it up?
Yes.
Into how much, to cover the cost of, Experian, doing a credit lock for all of our employees or something like that. That's what you're talking about, Kevin, right? Covering that cost?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have cybersecurity insurance that we have had on the district for, oh gosh, I apologize. I don't remember exactly when we instituted that policy, but we worked with Mr. Gordon when we talked to our liability insurance carrier. We also had our technology department there, our security officer there, our cybersecurity officer. So both Sam and Rob, Mr. Marshall and Mr. Sexton were in the room, and we talked about those issues specifically, Julie. What happens if there's a data breach? What can we do to offer support for our staff? How can we support if there is a credit issue? Are there services available? And so we do carry that coverage should something happen, God forbid. We do have the insurance in place to help us make those payments, and it wouldn't necessarily have to be a general fund expenditure short of the deductible. I also apologize, I did not bring the deductible with me. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can look at that and get it out to the group.
And again, to be clear, I think this needs to be vetted, but our cybersecurity coverage would only cover our activities and our actions. So if we partner with a third party and the third party is negligent, our cybersecurity coverage is not going to cover that negligence. In the way this contract is written, Meta is saying, look, even if we're negligent, all you're going to get from us is the fees you paid.
Okay.
I think that's a good point. Is there, I know that where I work, our coverage has changed to cover cybersecurity. And so is that something that, can you get an umbrella for cybersecurity? Can you add on to what we have?
The issue is the umbrella only covers your actions. What you need to make sure is that your third-party providers have sufficient coverage, or you really work through the captive liability coverage to make sure that they're not putting all that risk back on you. I get it. The price was better because they put the cap in. Well, they put the cap in because they put all that risk onto you.
So are we?
Am I misunderstanding the contract?
I don't know what further information I can provide you. If you don't feel that the contract is ready for approval, then we need to make a decision whether to pull it off the agenda or to vote no.
I'm fine pulling it and getting more information on what their responsibility would be to us if they suffer a data breach. Correct?
Go ahead.
And if you're asking me, I'm voting no on the contract as it's written.
Yeah. Are you fine with pulling it off, saying pull it off, get us more information, talk to them and ask them what they provide, or can they provide, will they upgrade the insurance policy that would give us and whoever's information is taken, will they provide us with credit monitoring?
Or even just uncap the liability that to the extent that they're deemed that they may be deemed negligent, that they would be responsible for their negligence.
Well, I think when we go through our action items, we could take a motion to table it until the next meeting at the end of June until we have clarification.
Understood.
Okay. Wait, I think Mr. King has his hand up.
Thank you. Just a comment. Number one, I do agree with pulling it. That is a real concern for me. I'll give you an example in my industry, my business. When I have a contract with a lot of engineering subcontracts that flow through me to the municipality, my consultants almost always put in their contracts what we call a limitation of liability, which, as Kevin just made reference, is their fee and only their fee. I strike it every time. I don't even ask the municipality for a limitation of liability on my work. So that's very much a concern for me that Kevin brought up. And I think it's a good move to table it and get more information on that.
Thank you, Mr. King. Thank you, Kevin and Julie, for your discussion on that. Okay. I don't see any other hands up. Anything else to the treasurer's report, Mrs. Hatfield?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any public participation?
Yes, we do. I believe that we have an individual that has submitted public participation for which Ms. Davis has the information to read. And forgive me, Mrs. Davis, I don't know that we discussed this earlier, but I believe that you will be reading it for the record.
I will, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. This was submitted by Danielle Hayden at 5963 Gainey Court, Westerville, Ohio, 43082. And I will read the submission now. Last year, Mr. Wright wrote in a written reprimand that an Olentangy principal, quote, undermined the integrity of the evaluation process by not completing a written teacher evaluation, end quote. Hasn't the board done the same thing by not completing a written evaluation for the superintendent for 2018-19? Mr. Rafe's evaluation of Mr. Wright for the 2018-2019 states he, quote, continues to perform in an exemplary manner, fulfilling all of his duties as the Chief of Administrative Services. He continues to provide outstanding supervision. He conducts a very thorough evaluation process for all of the principals. One of the responsibilities of a superintendent is to ensure all aspects of district operation comply with state laws and regulations. 2 years of teacher evaluations, a requirement, were not checked for completion. Evaluations should include strengths and weaknesses, and the board did not even complete a written evaluation for our superintendent. And that is it.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Hagen, for your comments. They are noted, and I will state that the Board of Education has revamped their superintendent evaluation, and it is not required by Ohio Revised Code. Any other public participation? Okay, so may I take a motion for to table treasurer action item A?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Feasel. A second?
Second, O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Please call the roll. Emily, make sure you're not muted.
My apologies. Mrs. Wagner-Fiesel,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Dr. Weiss,
Yes.
and Mrs. Patrick.
Yes. Mr. Rafe, will you please present your superintendent action items?
Yes, I'd like to present superintendent action items A through E for approval.
I'll enter, any discussion?
So if I could, the other thing I'd offer is item C, the insurance quotes. I think those are very attractive quotes given my understanding of the liability, particularly the property market. We're looking at a decline in the auto market, but the increase in property is probably in par with market. So I think those quotes look really good, and I think it's a good job by Jeff and his team to get that done.
I was pleasantly
Thank
surprised
you.
as well. Thank you.
Mr. Gordon does do he brings a lot of stuff to the front of the board, and he does a very good job of squeezing every penny. But so thank you for making note of that, Mr. O'Brien.
I mean, you'd be down 33% on the fee, 10% on auto, and absorb 21% increase in property and 18% liability. I think it's a good story.
Great, thank you.
Okay, may I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Fiesel. A second?
A second, Dr. Weiss.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Dr. Weiss,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
and Mrs. Patrick.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will now entertain a motion to adjourn. We will meet.
No.
We have one more action item, please.
Oh, we should
How could I
adjourn.
forget? I'm
No. Mr. O'Brien, you know you like her better than me.
I will put that on record.
Yes, I know. Everyone does. It's not saying much. I get it.
So let's welcome, is it Mr. Wright will be presenting?
Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Meyer.
Good evening. So
Good evening.
I'd like to present action item 12A, supplemental employment for Catherine Rafe as assistant cross-country coach at Berkshire Middle School.
And I just want to make a note, if I can, as with all the other supplementals we just approved, give Todd and Elaine Eddy credit for working this out. I think it's really important to highlight this, that every action item will now include this language, post-COVID, with note of on the subject, specifically conditioned on and subject to the activity/season occurring with proration in the event of partial performance as determined by the administration and the supplemental committee. So as we all know, last spring, when spring sports were canceled, we went ahead and paid all of our spring supplemental coaches. If we get into this situation, God forbid we don't have fall sports, nobody's getting paid in the fall. So Todd and Elaine did great work to work that out, and all of our contracts will reflect that.
Good.
Thank you for that work. I'm sorry it had to be done.
Yes.
You're welcome.
So may I have a motion to approve action?
I'll move.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. King. A second?
I'll second, Dr. Weiss.
Thank you, Dr. Wise. Mrs. Hatfield, please call the roll.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Dr. Weiss,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
I must have been on mute. Yes.
No. I should have brought her in here for it. Too bad.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. My apologies for missing that last item, but now I do see the last item, which is I will now entertain a motion to adjourn until we meet again virtually on June 25th. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
Second, Dr. Weiss.
Thank you. Mrs. Hatfield, please call the roll.
Mrs. Wagner Fiesel,
Yes.
Dr. Weiss,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien,
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening, and that concludes our board meeting.